The rain fell in heavy sheets as Beatrice Jenkins clutched her newborn baby tighter to her chest. The small overhang of the Kelton, Utah train station providing little protection from the storm. The Pacific Railroad had deposited her here alone, abandoned, and with nothing but the clothes on her back and her week-old son wrapped in a thin blanket. Her tears mingled with the raindrops on her face as the train that had carried her westward disappeared into the distance, taking with it the man who had promised her the world but delivered only heartbreak. It was 1869, and the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad earlier that year had brought promise to the small settlement of Kelton. The town was growing as a shipping point for freight and cattle, but on this stormy evening in October, it offered little comfort to a woman with nowhere to go. Beatrice had been foolish, she knew that now. Edward had been charming, handsome, and full of promises. He'd convinced her to leave her home in Boston, to travel west with him where they would marry and build a life together. But somewhere between Illinois and Utah, he'd changed. The baby, her precious William, had been born during a stop in Nebraska. Edward had looked at the child with distant eyes, claiming it didn't even look like him. 3 days later, when the train stopped in Kelton, he'd told her to wait with the baby while he secured them lodging. Hours had passed, and when the station master had handed her Edward's note, her world had crumbled. "You and that child will only hold me back," it read. "I've continued on to California. Don't follow me." Now the station was closing for the night. The station master, an elderly man with kind eyes but firm resolve, had told her the town had no hotel suitable for a lady, especially one with a child. "Perhaps come morning you could speak with the Reverend's wife," he'd suggested before locking up, leaving Beatrice to the mercy of the elements. The baby began to wail, his tiny face scrunching up in hunger and discomfort. Beatrice tried to soothe him, but her own body trembled from cold and exhaustion. "Please, William, please," she whispered, rocking him gently. "We'll find help soon, I promise." A horse's hooves splashed through puddles, the sound growing closer. Beatrice drew back into the shadows, fear gripping her heart. In Boston, she'd heard tales of the lawless West, of dangerous men who preyed on the vulnerable. She held her breath as a tall figure dismounted from a large chestnut stallion. The man approached the station, his spurs jingling with each step. Water dripped from the brim of his hat as he reached for the door handle, only to find it locked. "Damn," he muttered, turning away. That's when he spotted her. Beatrice clutched William tighter as the man approached. In the dim light from a nearby lantern, she could see he wore a leather duster, soaked through from the rain. A weathered face with a strong jaw was partially hidden beneath his wide-brimmed hat, but his eyes, they were sharp and alert, taking in her bedraggled appearance and the bundle in her arms. "Madam," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that surprised her. "Station's closed for the night." I know," she stammered, her voice barely audible above the storm. The baby's cry grew louder, more insistent. The man's gaze shifted to the bundle. "You have a child with you," Beatrice nodded, tears filling her eyes again. "My son, he's only a week old." Without hesitation, the man shrugged off his duster and held it over her, providing better shelter from the rain than the station's shallow overhang. "What are you doing out here in this weather?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. The story spilled from her lips, then Edward's promises, his abandonment, her complete lack of resources or connections in this strange place. As she spoke, William's cries grew more frantic. "He's hungry," she explained, her voice breaking, "and I haven't eaten since yesterday myself." The man's expression hardened, but she sensed his anger wasn't directed at her. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the baby. Hesitantly, Beatrice allowed him to take William. To her surprise, the man handled the infant with unexpected gentleness, cradling him securely in one arm while using his free hand to touch the baby's cheek. "He's cold," the man stated, then looked directly into Beatrice's eyes. His gaze was intense, assessing, but also filled with a decision already made. "I take them both," he declared firmly. I don't understand," Beatrice stammered. "My name is Jacob Grayson," he said. "I have a ranch about 5 miles outside of town. It's not much, but it's dry, warm, and there's food. I can't leave a woman and her newborn out here to die in this storm." "Why would you help us?" Beatrice asked, suspicion warring with desperate hope. Something flickered across Jacob's face, a shadow of old pain quickly masked. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because I know what it means to be left with nowhere to turn." He handed William back to her, then removed a bandana from his pocket, fashioning it into a sling across his chest. "Put him in here against my body. He'll stay warmer that way. Then you can wear my coat and ride behind me." Beatrice hesitated only briefly before placing William in the makeshift sling. The baby immediately quieted, soothed by the warmth. Jacob helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her, his arms creating a secure circle around both her and the baby as he took the reins. "Hold on tight, madam." As they rode through the storm toward whatever uncertain future awaited them, Beatrice realized that for the first time since Edward's betrayal, she felt something besides despair. She felt safe. Jacob's ranch was modest, but well-maintained, a small main house constructed of solid pine logs, a barn, and a corral. Despite the darkness and ongoing rain, Beatrice could tell the property spoke of hard work and care. "It's not much," Jacob said as he helped her down from the horse. "But it's home." Inside, he quickly built up the fire in the stone hearth while Beatrice stood dripping on the wooden floor, still clutching William. The interior was simple but clean, a main room with a kitchen area, a wooden table with 4 chairs, a sofa covered in a worn quilt, and bookshelves filled with volumes that surprised her. Not what she expected in a cowboy's cabin. "There's a bedroom through there," Jacob pointed to a door on the right. "You and your son can take it. I'll sleep out here." "Mr. Grayson, I can't possibly—" "Jacob," he corrected. "And yes, you can. You need rest, and so does the little one." As if on cue, William began to cry again, his tiny body squirming against her. "First, let's get you both dry and fed," Jacob said. He disappeared into the bedroom, returning with a flannel shirt and a pair of trousers. "These will swim on you, but they're dry. There are towels in the bedroom. I'll heat some milk for the baby and make us something to eat while you change." Beatrice wanted to protest, to maintain some semblance of propriety, but exhaustion and hunger won out. She took the offered clothes and retreated to the bedroom. The room was simply furnished with a bed, a chest of drawers, and a small table. Everything was neat and masculine, but a handmade quilt on the bed added unexpected warmth to the space. She carefully laid William on the bed and quickly changed into Jacob's clothes, rolling up the sleeves and pant legs. The fabric carried the scent of soap and sunshine, clean and comforting. When she emerged from the bedroom with William, Jacob was at the stove, stirring something that smelled wonderful. A pot of milk was warming on another burner. "I've got some stew," he said without turning around. "And the milk should be ready for the little one soon. Do you have a bottle for him?" Beatrice's face flushed with embarrassment. I mean I feed him myself." Jacob nodded, seemingly unfazed. "You eat first then. The chair by the fire might be most comfortable when you need to tend to him." He served her a bowl of venison stew and fresh bread, setting it on a small table next to the rocking chair by the fire. Beatrice sat down gratefully, balancing William in one arm while she ate with the other. The food was surprisingly good, hearty and flavorful. "This is delicious," she said between bites. "Thank you." Jacob sat at the table with his own bowl, giving her space and a measure of privacy. "My mother taught me to cook before she passed, said no man should rely on a woman to keep from starving. She sounds like a wise woman. She was." His voice held a note of old grief. Once Beatrice had eaten her fill, William's cries became impossible to ignore. With a deep breath and a silent prayer for courage, she adjusted Jacob's shirt to feed her son. To his credit, Jacob kept his eyes averted, focusing intently on his meal. "I should explain," she said softly, needing to fill the awkward silence. "William's father and I were to be married when we reached California. At least that's what he promised." Jacob's jaw tightened. "Some men don't deserve the title of father." "I was naive," Beatrice admitted. "Edward was charming and sophisticated. When he asked me to accompany him west, it seemed romantic and adventure. My parents died 3 years ago, leaving me with few prospects in Boston. I worked as a schoolteacher, but Edward promised me a better life." "And then he abandoned you both," Jacob stated flatly. Yes, at the station today, he left a note saying. Her voice faltered, saying we would only hold him back. Jacob's hand tightened around his spoon. If I ever meet this Edward, he'll regret those words. The fierce protectiveness in his voice startled her. You don't even know me. I know enough, he replied. I know you're brave. Traveling across the country while with child takes courage. I know you're devoted to your son, and I know you didn't deserve what happened to you. William finished nursing, and Beatrice adjusted her clothing before lifting him to her shoulder to burp him. What happens now, Mr. Gray Jacob? You rest, he said simply. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what you want to do. The stage comes through Kelton twice a week. If you have somewhere to go, I can help you get there. Beatrice fought back tears. I have nowhere. No family, no funds, nothing. Jacob nodded as if he'd expected this answer. Then stay here until you decide what's next. I've got the space and I could use the company. He paused. If you're comfortable with that arrangement. Why are you doing this? She asked again, needing to understand his motives. Jacob was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. 10 years ago, I came west with nothing but a dream and the clothes on my back. A family took me in, gave me work, shelter, taught me ranching. They asked nothing in return except that someday I pass on the kindness. He met her eyes. This is me keeping that promise. That night, lying in Jacob's bed with William sleeping beside her, Beatrice stared at the ceiling, listening to the rain drumming on the roof. For the first time since Edward's betrayal, she allowed herself to truly weep for her broken dreams, for her uncertain future, and strangely with relief. Whatever tomorrow held, tonight they were safe, warm, and fed, thanks to the unexpected kindness of a stranger. Morning brought sunshine streaming through the bedroom window and the smell of coffee and bacon. Beatrice fed William, changed him using the clean cloths Jacob had provided, and dressed in her own clothes, which had dried overnight by the fire. In the kitchen, Jacob stood at the stove, his back to her. He'd clearly been up for hours. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms, and his hair was damp, as if he'd recently washed. Good morning, she said tentatively. He turned, a small smile softening his weathered features. Morning, hope you slept well. Better than I expected, she admitted. Thank you for the bed. Coffee, he offered, pouring a cup without waiting for her answer. Breakfast is almost ready. They ate in companionable silence. Jacob didn't press her with questions, for which Beatrice was grateful. After the meal, he cleared the dishes and said, I need to tend to the stock. You're welcome to rest, or if you feel up to it, make yourself at home. Once alone, Beatrice explored the small house. The bookshelves held an eclectic collection novels by Dickens and Cooper, practical manuals on ranching and animal husbandry, histories of the West, and even poetry. Not what she'd expected from a cowboy. On a small desk in the corner, she noticed a framed photograph, a solemn-faced couple standing behind a young boy of perhaps 12. The resemblance between the boy and Jacob was unmistakable. Outside, she watched through the window as Jacob moved with confident efficiency around the property. He fed chickens, checked on 2 milk cows, and worked with a young horse in the corral. There was something compelling about his quiet competence, the gentle way he handled the animals. When he returned for the midday meal, he brought fresh eggs and milk. Thought you might want these for the little one, he said, setting the milk on the table. Cow's milk isn't as good as mother's milk, I know, but it might help supplement if you need it. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. Jacob, I don't know how to thank you. He shrugged, seemingly uncomfortable with her gratitude. No need for thanks, just doing what's right. Over lunch, Beatrice gathered her courage. I need to find work, she said. I can't impose on you indefinitely. Jacob considered her words. What skills do you have? I was a school teacher in Boston. I'm well educated, good with numbers. I can cook and sew, though not exceptionally well. Kelton's growing, Jacob replied. The railroad's bringing more families. Last town meeting, there was talk of needing a school teacher come spring. He paused. Until then, you're welcome to stay here. Beatrice shook her head. That's too much to ask. I won't be a charity case. Jacob's eyes met hers, steady and serious. Then don't be. Work with me. I could use help around here, especially with winter coming. You can earn your keep until something else comes along. I know nothing about ranching, she protested. You can learn, he replied simply. And there's plenty to do inside as well. Truth is, I'm gone for days sometimes when I'm working cattle. Having someone here to keep things running would be a help, not a burden. Beatrice considered his offer. It was highly improper, an unmarried woman living with a bachelor, but her options were limited, and there was something about Jacob Grayson that made her trust him. What would people think? She asked, voicing her concern. A wry smile touched his lips. Folks around here mind their business mostly, but if it bothers you, we could say you're my widowed sister, come to help after losing your husband. Beatrice nodded slowly. Just until I find something more suitable. Of course. He stood, brushing crumbs from his shirt. I need to ride into town for supplies. Is there anything you or the baby need? She hesitated, embarrassed by her lack of resources. I don't have any money to make a list, he interrupted gently. We'll settle accounts when you start working. After Jacob left, Beatrice sat in the rocking chair by the window, William sleeping in her arms, and wondered at the strange turn her life had taken. 24 hours ago, she'd been abandoned and desperate. Now she had shelter, food, and a tentative plan for the future. All because a cowboy had decided to take them both in from the storm. The days began to settle into a rhythm. Jacob taught Beatrice the basics of maintaining the ranch, how to feed the chickens, milk the cows, tend the small vegetable garden that provided much of their food. Inside, she took over cooking and cleaning, grateful to contribute something in return for his generosity. William thrived in the peaceful environment. At 2 weeks old, he was gaining weight and beginning to show more awareness of his surroundings. Jacob seemed fascinated by the baby, often watching him with a mixture of curiosity and tenderness that Beatrice found oddly moving. Have you ever been married? She asked one evening as they sat by the fire, Jacob whittling a small wooden horse while she mended one of his shirts. He shook his head. Never found the right woman, or maybe never stayed in one place long enough to look properly. You've traveled a lot since I was 16, he confirmed. Left home in Missouri after my parents died in a fire, worked my way west Cowhands Railroad, whatever paid. Ended up here 5 years ago when I had enough saved to buy this place. Do you like it? Ranching, I mean. A genuine smile lit his face. I do. There's something right about working the land, raising stock, building something that's yours. He glanced at her. What about you? Did you like teaching? I did, Beatrice said, surprised by the wistfulness in her voice. I loved watching children learn, seeing that moment when understanding dawns in their eyes. You'll teach again, Jacob said confidently. Kelton needs a school. 2 weeks after her arrival, Jacob announced he needed to ride out to check on cattle in the high pastures. I'll be gone 3 days, maybe 4, he said, packing supplies into saddlebags. You'll be all right here, Beatrice assured him they would be fine. She knew the routine now, which animals needed feeding, how to maintain the fire, where Jacob kept his rifle in case of emergency. I loaded the shotgun, he said, pointing to the weapon propped by the door. Not that you'll need it, but just in case. After he left, the house felt strangely empty. Beatrice kept busy with chores and caring for William, but she found herself listening for Jacob's footsteps, missing his quiet presence. On the third night, a storm blew in, not rain this time, but wind that howled around the cabin like a living thing, rattling the windows and sending the temperature plummeting. Beatrice built up the fire and worried about Jacob, out in the elements. Near midnight, she heard a horse approaching. Relief flooded through her as she rushed to the door, lantern in hand. Jacob dismounted stiffly, his face pale with exhaustion and cold. You're frozen, she exclaimed, helping him inside. Sit by the fire, I'll make coffee. Thank you, he said through chattering teeth. Got caught in the storm coming down from the ridge. Beatrice brought him coffee laced with whiskey from the bottle he kept for medicinal purposes. As he warmed by the fire, she noticed he was favoring his left arm. You're hurt, she said. It's nothing. Horse stumbled, and I wrenched my shoulder, catching myself. Let me see. After some resistance, Jacob allowed her to examine his shoulder. It wasn't dislocated, but the muscles were badly strained. Working with gentle efficiency, Beatrice applied a hot compress, then bandaged the shoulder to immobilize it. Where did you learn this? Jacob asked, watching her work. My father was a doctor, she explained. I often assisted him with patients. When she finished, their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, of how quickly they'd come to rely on each other. "I'm glad you're back safely," Beatrice said softly. Jacob's hand caught hers, squeezing gently. "I'm glad I had somewhere to come back to." The weeks passed, and October gave way to November. The air grew colder, and Jacob spent long hours cutting and stacking firewood, preparing for the harsh Utah winter. Beatrice took on more responsibilities around the ranch, proving herself a quick learner and a hard worker. William was a month old now, alert and strong. To Beatrice's surprise and gratitude, Jacob had crafted a cradle for the baby, carving delicate patterns of stars and moons into the headboard. "It's beautiful," she'd said when he presented it, tracing the intricate designs with her fingertips. "Every child deserves a proper place to sleep," Jacob had replied, a hint of color touching his cheeks at her praise. One Saturday, Jacob suggested they ride into Kelton. "You've been here nearly a month without seeing more than these four walls and the barn," he said. "Besides, I need supplies, and you might want to meet some of the townspeople if you're thinking of teaching here." Beatrice hesitated. "What will we tell people about our arrangement?" "The truth," Jacob said simply. "That I found you stranded at the station and offered you work and shelter until you get on your feet. Anyone who thinks poorly of that isn't worth bothering with." They rode into town with William securely bundled against Beatrice's chest in a sling Jacob had fashioned from soft leather. Kelton was busier than Beatrice had expected. The railroad had brought growth and prosperity to what had once been little more than a watering stop. At the general store, Jacob introduced her to the proprietor, Mr. Simmons, and his wife. "This is Miss Jenkins and her son William," he said. "They're staying at my place for now." Mrs. Simmons, a plump, cheerful woman with kind eyes, immediately took to Beatrice. "Oh, you poor dear, all alone with a little one. Thank goodness Mr. Grayson found you." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "He's a good man, our Jacob. Keeps to himself mostly, but always the first to help when there's trouble." While Jacob discussed feed prices with Mr. Simmons, Mrs. Simmons showed Beatrice fabrics and baby clothes. "The railroad brings in new goods every week now," she explained proudly. "Not like the old days when we had to make do with whatever came by wagon." Beatrice longed for new clothes for William and herself, but was acutely aware of her financial situation. When Mrs. Simmons asked if she'd like to purchase anything, she reluctantly declined. "Perhaps another time," she said, her cheeks warm with embarrassment. Later, as they prepared to leave, Jacob handed her a package. "This is for you and William," he said. "Nothing fancy, just some necessities." Inside the package, Beatrice found fabric for a new dress, yarn for knitting, and 2 ready-made gowns for William. Tears pricked her eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Jacob, I can't accept. Consider it an advance on your wages," he interrupted. "You've more than earned it with your work at the ranch." Before she could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. A wagon had overturned, spilling lumber across the street. Jacob immediately moved to help, joining other men in righting the wagon and retrieving the scattered timber. Beatrice watched him work, struck by his strength and the natural way he took charge of the situation, directing others without seeming to command. Several women gathered around her, introducing themselves and cooing over William. "You're staying with Mr. Grayson?" asked Mrs. Peterson, the Reverend's wife. "Yes, temporarily," Beatrice replied cautiously. "He's been kind enough to offer shelter while I look for more permanent arrangements." "I understand you were a teacher back east," Mrs. Peterson continued. "We're hoping to start a proper school here by spring. The children are currently learning in the church 3 days a week, but it's far from ideal." Hope surged in Beatrice's heart. "I would be very interested in teaching again." "Wonderful. You must come to Sunday services tomorrow. The whole town will be there and you can meet the school committee." As they rode home, Beatrice shared the news about the teaching possibility. Jacob seemed pleased but oddly subdued. "That's good," he said. "Teaching is what you want." "Yes," she agreed, though with less certainty than before. The prospect of leaving Jacob's ranch, leaving Jacob, no longer felt like the relief it once might have. That evening, as they sat by the fire, William sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Beatrice found herself studying Jacob's profile. In the month she'd known him, she'd come to appreciate not just his kindness but his quiet intelligence, his gentle humor, his unfailing integrity. There was a depth to him that belied his rough exterior. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Jacob asked, catching her gaze. "You," she admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. "How different you are from what I expected," his eyebrow raised in question. "And what did you expect?" "I don't know. When I first saw you at the station, this tall cowboy with spurs jingling, I thought perhaps you'd be." She searched for the right word. Uncouth, simple, dangerous. He supplied the options with a wry smile. "All of those, perhaps," she acknowledged. "Instead, you're the most honorable man I've ever known." Something flickered in his eyes, a warmth that made her heart beat faster. "And you, Beatrice Jenkins, are the strongest woman I've ever met." The way he said her name with a gentle reverence sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the evening chill. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold. Beatrice dressed in her best, the blue dress she'd worn on the train, now cleaned and pressed. Jacob surprised her by appearing in a suit she hadn't seen before, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. "You clean up well, Mr. Grayson," she teased, enjoying the hint of color that touched his cheeks. "As do you, Miss Jenkins," he replied, his eyes lingering on her in a way that made her pulse quicken. The small church in Kelton was packed with families. Beatrice felt the curious stares as she entered with Jacob, William in her arms, but the warmth of the greetings they received soon put her at ease. Reverend Peterson preached on charity and kindness, and Beatrice couldn't help feeling the sermon was at least partly directed at anyone who might judge her situation. After the service, Jacob was pulled into conversation with several ranchers, while Beatrice found herself surrounded by the town's women, all eager to see the baby and hear her story. She kept it simple, explaining that she'd been abandoned at the station and that Jacob had offered her work and shelter. Most seemed to accept this without question, though a few exchanged knowing glances that made Beatrice uncomfortable. Mrs. Peterson introduced her to Mr. Holloway, head of the school committee. "We're very interested in having a proper teacher by spring," he explained. "The position would include lodging a small house behind the school. It's not much, but it would be yours." "That sounds wonderful," Beatrice said, though the thought of leaving Jacob's ranch no longer filled her with the relief it once might have. As they rode home, William sleeping against her chest, Beatrice found herself watching Jacob's profile, struck by how right it felt to be here with him. "The school committee wants me to start teaching in the spring," she said. "They would provide a house for William and me." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. "That's good news," he finally said, his voice carefully neutral. "You'd be good for this town. The children need someone like you." "Yes," she agreed, waiting for him to say more. When he didn't, she added, "It's still months away." "Plenty of time," he nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. That night, after William was asleep, Beatrice found Jacob on the porch, staring at the stars. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and joined him, standing close enough that their arms almost touched. "Might snow tonight," he said, nodding toward the sky. "Air has that feel to it." "Jacob," she began, gathering her courage, "I want to thank you for everything you've done for us." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. "You don't need to thank me, Beatrice." "I do," she insisted. "When you found us at that station, I had nothing, no hope, no future, just fear and shame. You gave us more than shelter. You gave me back my dignity, my sense of worth." Jacob's hand reached out hesitantly to touch her cheek. "You never lost your worth," he said softly. "That fool who left you never deserved you in the first place." His touch sent warmth spreading through her, and Beatrice found herself leaning closer, drawn by something stronger than propriety or caution. For a moment, it seemed Jacob might kiss her, his head bent toward hers, his breath warm on her face. Then William's cry broke the spell. Beatrice stepped back, her heart pounding. "I should go to him." Jacob nodded, his hand falling away. "Good night, Beatrice." "Good night, Jacob," she whispered, hurrying inside, her mind spinning with emotions she wasn't ready to name. The first snow came that night, blanketing the ranch in white. By morning, the world was transformed, pristine, silent, beautiful in its starkness. Jacob spent the day ensuring the animals were secure and had extra feed, while Beatrice cooked and tidied indoors. The weather kept them homebound for 3 days, intensifying the intimacy of their shared space. They fell into comfortable patterns, Jacob reading aloud in the evenings while Beatrice mended or knitted, William sleeping peacefully in his cradle nearby. They talked more freely than before, sharing stories of their pasts, their dreams, their disappointments. Beatrice learned that Jacob had once hoped to be a veterinarian, but lacked the means for proper schooling. Instead, he'd educated himself through books and experience, becoming the person neighboring ranchers called when their animals were sick or injured. "You could still study," she suggested one evening. "It's never too late," Jacob smiled wryly. "Maybe, but this life suits me well enough. I'm my own man here." In turn, she told him about growing up in Boston, the daughter of a doctor who'd encouraged her education but died before seeing her established in her teaching career. She spoke of her brief courtship with Edward, how his promises of adventure and prosperity had seemed an escape from the loneliness of her life after her parents' deaths. "I was a fool," she concluded. "I saw what I wanted to see in him." "We all make mistakes," Jacob replied. "The measure of a person is how they recover from them." By those standards, Beatrice thought, Jacob Grayson measured up extraordinarily well. The snow melted enough by the fourth day for Jacob to ride into town for mail and supplies. He returned with news that made Beatrice's blood run cold. "A man was asking about you at the station," he said, his expression grave. "Described you and the baby pretty accurately, said he was looking for his wife who had run off with their child." Beatrice's hand flew to her throat. "Edward, here in Kelton," Jacob nodded grimly. "Station master said the man claimed his name was Edward Jenkins, said you'd had a misunderstanding and he'd come to take you home." "I'm not his wife," Beatrice said, her voice trembling with anger and fear. "We were never married. He abandoned us." "I know," Jacob said gently. "The station master didn't tell him anything, said he didn't recall seeing anyone matching your description." Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by renewed fear. "What if he finds us here?" Jacob's expression hardened. "Let him try. This is my land. You and William are under my protection." The fierce protectiveness in his voice should have reassured her, but Beatrice knew Edward. He was charming, persuasive, and determined when he wanted something, and if he'd tracked them to Kelton, he had some reason for wanting to find them. Why would he come looking for us now? She wondered aloud. He made it very clear we were burdens he didn't want. Jacob's jaw tightened. "I don't know, but I intend to find out if he shows his face around here." That night, Beatrice barely slept, jumping at every sound. The thought of Edward finding them of him trying to claim William filled her with dread. By morning, she'd made a decision. "We should leave," she told Jacob as he came in from the morning chores. "William and I, if Edward is looking for us, our presence puts you in danger too." Jacob's expression darkened. "You're not going anywhere, Beatrice, not unless it's what you truly want." "What I want doesn't matter," she exclaimed. "Edward could be dangerous. You don't know him like I do." "Then help me understand," Jacob said, his voice softening as he took her hands in his. "Tell me what you're afraid of." Seated at the kitchen table, William sleeping in his cradle nearby, Beatrice told Jacob everything: how Edward had seemed so perfect at first, how he'd courted her with expensive gifts and grand promises, how he'd convinced her to leave Boston with him, using her funds to finance their journey. "Once we were on the train, he changed," she explained. "He became controlling, critical. When I told him I was with child, he was furious, accused me of trapping him. When William was born, Edward barely looked at him." Jacob listened intently, his hands clenched on the table. "And now he claims you're his wife, that William is his son, William is his child," Beatrice admitted reluctantly. "But we were never married. He proposed, yes, but always had some reason to delay the ceremony. I realize now he never intended to marry me at all." "So he has no legal claim to either of you," Jacob stated firmly. "Perhaps not legally, but Edward comes from a wealthy, influential family. He has resources, connections I don't have." Jacob stood, pacing the room with barely contained anger. "He abandoned you both at a remote train station in a storm. No judge in any territory would grant him custody after that." "You don't know that," Beatrice argued. "Men have rights over their children that women don't, and if he convinces people we were married, were you?" Jacob asked bluntly. In the eyes of God, if not the law, Beatrice's cheeks burned with shame. No, she whispered. We were not. Jacob knelt before her, taking her hands again. Beatrice, look at me. You have nothing to be ashamed of. You believed his promises. The shame is his alone. Tears filled her eyes at his words, at the acceptance in his gaze. Why are you so good to us, Jacob? Something shifted in his expression, then a vulnerability she'd never seen before. Because I care about you, he said simply. Both of you. Before she could respond, a knock at the door startled them both. Jacob rose, his hand moving instinctively to the rifle propped nearby. Stay here, he instructed, moving to the door. It was Mrs. Peterson, the Reverend's wife, her expression troubled. Mr. Grayson, I'm sorry to disturb you, but I thought Miss Jenkins should know there's a man in town claiming to be her husband. He's staying at the boarding house and telling everyone she ran away with their child. Jacob's expression darkened. Thank you for the warning, Mrs. Peterson. Would you like to come in? The woman shook her head. I can't stay, but I wanted you both to know that not everyone believes him, those of us who have met Miss Jenkins and seen how she cares for her son. She hesitated. Well, we have our doubts about this supposed husband who appears months after the fact. After she left, Beatrice sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. He's turning the town against me. Not everyone, Jacob reminded her. And not me, never me. The next morning, Jacob announced he was riding into town. I need to see this man for myself, he explained, checking his revolver before holstering it. Understand what we're dealing with. Jacob, please, Beatrice pleaded. He could be dangerous. So can I, Jacob replied grimly. Stay inside, keep the doors locked. I'll be back before nightfall. The hours of Jacob's absence were the longest of Beatrice's life. She paced the cabin, startling at every sound, clutching William to her chest as if Edward might materialize at any moment to snatch him away. When she finally heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching, the sun was already setting. Jacob dismounted wearily, his expression unreadable as he entered the cabin. Did you see him? Beatrice asked, searching his face for clues. Jacob nodded, removing his hat and coat. I did. And? He's a snake, Jacob said flatly. Charming the women, buying drinks for the men, spinning tales about his heartbroken search for his beloved wife and son. Beatrice's stomach churned. Did he see you? Oh yes, Jacob's mouth curved in a grim smile. We had quite the conversation. Jacob, what did you do? Nothing violent, if that's what you're worried about, he assured her. Though it wasn't for lack of wanting to. I introduced myself as your employer and asked about his intentions. What did he say? He claims he made a terrible mistake, that he panicked when the baby came early. Jacob's voice was tight with controlled anger. Said he's come to make things right, to take you both to California where he has a business opportunity waiting. Beatrice shook her head vehemently. I don't believe him. Edward doesn't make mistakes, he makes calculations. If he's here, it's because he wants something. I agree, Jacob said. The question is what? They didn't have to wait long to find out. The next morning, a hired buggy approached the ranch. Beatrice watched from the window as Edward himself stepped down, handsome as ever in his tailored suit, his golden hair gleaming in the winter sunlight. Stay inside, Jacob instructed, moving to the door. Let me handle this. But Beatrice couldn't hide. This was her battle, her future at stake. With William in her arms, she followed Jacob onto the porch. Edward's smile faltered slightly when he saw her, but he quickly recovered. Beatrice, my darling, he called, approaching with arms outstretched. Thank God I've found you. Jacob stepped between them, his posture protective. That's close enough, Mr. Jenkins. Edward's smile became strained. I understand your concern, Mr. Grayson, but this is a family matter. I've come to take my wife and son home. I am not your wife, Beatrice said clearly. You made that abundantly clear when you abandoned us at the train station. Edward had the grace to look abashed. A momentary weakness, my dear. The pressures of travel, the unexpected arrival of the child. I panicked, but I've come to make amends. Why now? Jacob demanded. It's been over a month. Edward's gaze flickered. I needed time to secure our future. I have a partner in San Francisco. We're opening an import business. We'll have a fine house, servants. You'll want for nothing, Beatrice. There was something calculating in his eyes that made Beatrice's skin crawl. Why the sudden interest in being a father, Edward? You barely looked at William when he was born. A flash of irritation crossed Edward's face before he mastered it. He's my son. Of course I want him with me. And me. Beatrice pressed. Do you want me as well? Or just the child? Edward's expression hardened slightly. Don't be ridiculous, Beatrice. I've traveled all this way to find you both. Jacob stepped closer, his voice dangerously quiet. Answer the question, Jenkins. Is it the woman or the child you're after? For a moment, Edward's charming facade cracked, revealing the cold calculation beneath. Then he recovered, spreading his hands in a gesture of innocence. I want my family, of course, both of them. But Beatrice had seen that flicker of truth in his eyes. It's not me you want, she said slowly. It's William. Why, Edward? You showed no interest in him before. Edward's smile became strained. He's my son, my heir. Heir to what? Jacob demanded. What's changed since you left them to die in a storm? A muscle ticked in Edward's jaw. My circumstances have improved. I've secured a partnership that will make me a wealthy man. Naturally, I want my son to inherit. Beatrice studied him, seeing past the handsome exterior to the calculating mind beneath. No, she said finally. There's something else. Tell me the truth, Edward. Why have you really come for William? Edward's facade crumpled slightly. My partner in San Francisco is childless. His wife has longed for a baby for years. When I mentioned I had a newborn son, you what? Beatrice gasped, clutching William tighter. It's a perfect arrangement, Edward continued hurriedly. They'll adopt him legally, raise him as their own. They're wealthy, influential. The boy will have every advantage. You want to sell our son, Beatrice whispered, horror washing through her. Edward flinched at her phrasing. Not sell, exactly. There would be compensation, of course, enough for us to start fresh somewhere else. Jacob moved so quickly that neither of them saw it coming. One moment he was beside Beatrice, the next he had Edward by the collar, lifting him nearly off his feet. You miserable excuse for a human being, he growled. You abandoned them, left them to die, and now you want to sell your own child. Unhand me, Edward sputtered, his face reddening. This is none of your concern, Cowboy. She's not your wife, and that's not your child. No, Jacob agreed, his voice deadly calm as he set Edward back on his feet. But they're under my protection. And if you value your life, you'll get back in that buggy and leave. Now. Edward straightened his jacket, his eyes cold with hatred. This isn't over, Grayson. That's my son, and I'll have him one way or another. No, you won't, Beatrice said with quiet certainty. William is my son. You forfeited any right to him when you left us to die. Edward turned to her, his handsome face twisting with anger. Don't be a fool, Beatrice. What kind of life can you give him here? Raised in a cowboy's shack, with no advantages, no education. With me, he could have everything. Except love, Beatrice replied. He would have everything except the one thing that matters most. Something ugly flashed in Edward's eyes. You always were sentimental. It's why you're so easy to manipulate. He glanced at Jacob with contempt. And you've found yourself another protector, I see. Does he know what you're willing to do for security, Beatrice? Jacob's fist connected with Edward's jaw before Beatrice could respond. The blow sent Edward stumbling backward, blood trickling from his split lip. You've made a grave mistake, Cowboy, Edward snarled, touching his bleeding mouth. I have friends in this territory, influential friends who won't take kindly to you assaulting a businessman. And I have friends who won't take kindly to a man who abandons his child and then tries to sell him, Jacob countered. Now get off my land before I forget my manners entirely. For a tense moment, it seemed Edward might press the issue. Then, with a final venomous glare, he turned and stalked back to the buggy. This isn't over, he called as he climbed in. Not by a long shot. They watched in silence as the buggy disappeared down the road. Only when it was out of sight did Beatrice realize she was trembling uncontrollably. Jacob led her inside, gently settling her in the chair by the fire. He'll be back, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. He'll find a way to take William. He's resourceful, connected, Beatrice, Jacob interrupted softly, kneeling before her. Look at me. She raised her eyes to his, finding strength and certainty there. I will not let him take William, Jacob promised. Or you, not now, not ever. How can you stop him? She asked, her voice breaking. If he goes to a judge, claims paternal rights, there's one way to ensure he can never take William from you, Jacob said, his voice steady despite the sudden vulnerability in his eyes. one way to protect you both legally, beyond any challenge Edward could mount. Beatrice's breath caught as she understood his meaning. "Jacob, are you marry me, Beatrice," he said simply. "Be my wife. Let me adopt William as my son. Edward would have no claim then not against a legal husband and father." "Jacob," she whispered, searching his face. "I can't ask you to sacrifice your freedom for us." A gentle smile touched his lips. "It's no sacrifice, Beatrice. These past weeks with you and William, they've been the happiest of my life. This house wasn't a home until you were in it." He took her hands in his touch warm and steady. "I'm not proposing just to protect you, though I would do that regardless. I'm proposing because I love you, because I want to build a life with you and William if you'll have me." Tears filled Beatrice's eyes, but they were different tears now born of hope rather than fear. "Are you certain?" "Marriage is a lifetime commitment. I've never been more certain of anything," Jacob replied. "The moment I saw you at that station, something in me knew. When I said I would take you both, I meant it not just for a night or a season, but for always." William stirred in Beatrice's arms, his tiny hand reaching up to touch her chin. Looking down at her son, then back at the man kneeling before her, this strong, gentle, honorable man who had saved them in every way a person could be saved, Beatrice found her answer. "Yes," she whispered, joy blooming in her heart. "Yes, I will marry you, Jacob Grayson." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, brilliant and full of promise. Leaning forward, he kissed her for the first time, a gentle press of lips that held both tenderness and passion. Beatrice felt something shift inside her, a broken piece of her heart mending itself in the warmth of his love. When they parted, Jacob touched William's cheek softly. "I promise to be the father he deserves," he said, "to love him as my own blood." "You already do," Beatrice replied, seeing the truth of it in his eyes. They were married 2 days later in the small church in Kelton. Reverend Peterson conducted the ceremony, his wife serving as witness along with Mr. Simmons from the general store and several ranchers who had come to respect Jacob over the years. Beatrice wore a simple cream-colored dress that Mrs. Peterson had helped her make, and Jacob wore his Sunday suit. William, dressed in a white gown, slept peacefully in Mrs. Peterson's arms during the ceremony. Word of Edward's true intentions had spread through the small community, turning sentiment firmly against him. When he'd tried to rally support for his claim, he'd found doors closed and faces hostile. The day before the wedding, he'd left on the eastbound train, though not before sending a threatening note promising he wasn't finished with them yet. But as Beatrice and Jacob exchanged vows, Edward seemed a distant shadow compared to the brightness of the future before them. When Jacob slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his mother's ring, he'd told her, saved all these years, Beatrice felt a sense of rightness, of coming home. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Peterson declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Jacob's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, sealing their union before God and their new community. The small reception at the church hall afterward was a joyous affair. The women of Kelton had prepared food, the men brought drink, and someone produced a fiddle for dancing. Beatrice found herself welcomed into the community not as an outsider or object of scandal, but as Jacob Grayson's wife, respected, accepted, valued. As they danced, William sleeping contentedly in his new cradle nearby, a wedding gift from the Simmons, Beatrice looked up at her husband with wonder. "Are you happy?" Jacob asked, his arms secure around her waist. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she admitted. "When Edward left us at that station, I thought my life was over. I never imagined it was just beginning." Jacob's smile was tender as he pulled her closer. "This is just the first chapter, Mrs. Grayson. We have a lifetime ahead of us." That night, returning to the ranch to their home, Beatrice felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation. Jacob must have sensed her anxiety, for he was gentle and patient, tending to the animals and building up the fire while she put William down for the night. When she emerged from the bedroom, Jacob was waiting by the fire, his expression soft in the golden light. Without words, he held out his hand to her. Beatrice took it, letting him draw her close. "I meant what I said before," he murmured, his fingers tracing the curve of her cheek. "Nothing has to happen until you're ready. This marriage is real to me regardless." Beatrice's heart swelled with love for this man who consistently put her needs before his own. "I am ready," she whispered, rising on her toes to kiss him. "I want to be your wife in every way, Jacob." His arms tightened around her, and when he kissed her, it was with a passion that had been carefully banked until now. Beatrice responded in kind, her body awakening to sensations she'd never experienced before, not even with Edward, whose touch had always felt like a taking rather than a giving. Jacob lifted her into his arms, carrying her to the bedroom that was now theirs to share. As he laid her gently on the bed, his eyes never leaving hers, Beatrice knew she had found not just safety but love deep, abiding love that would shelter her and William for all their days. Later, lying in the circle of Jacob's arms, listening to the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear, Beatrice marveled at how completely her life had transformed in just over a month. From despair to joy, from abandonment to belonging, from solitude to family. "What are you thinking?" Jacob murmured, his fingers gently combing through her loose hair. "That I'm exactly where I'm meant to be," she replied, pressing a kiss to his chest. "That everything that happened, even the painful parts, led me here to you." Jacob's arms tightened around her. "I believe that too. When I found you and William at that station, something in me knew you were meant to be mine to protect, to love." "Your lost sheep," she teased gently. He chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her cheek. "My family," he corrected. "The family I never thought I'd have." In the cradle across the room, William stirred, making the small snuffling sounds that preceded waking. Jacob pressed a kiss to Beatrice's forehead before releasing her. "I'll get him," he offered, rising from the bed. Beatrice watched as her husband lifted her son gently from the cradle, cradling him with practiced ease that belied how new he was to fatherhood. Jacob brought William to her, settling back beside her on the bed as she prepared to feed the baby. "He has your eyes," Jacob observed, touching William's cheek tenderly. "And your determination," Beatrice replied with a smile. "Have you noticed how he furrows his brow just like you do when you're concentrating?" Jacob's expression softened as he watched William nurse. "Do you think, someday, you might want more children?" The question held vulnerability that touched Beatrice deeply. "I would love that," she said softly. "Brothers and sisters for William, a house full of Graysons." The smile that lit Jacob's face was worth everything she'd endured to reach this moment. "I love you, Beatrice Grayson," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And I love you, Jacob Grayson," she replied, knowing it for the absolute truth, "with all my heart." Spring came to the Utah Territory, bringing new life and new beginnings. The school committee had indeed offered Beatrice the teaching position, but after careful consideration and many discussions with Jacob, she decided to decline for now. William was still young, the ranch kept them both busy, and the truth was, she wasn't ready to leave the home they were building together. "The school will still need a teacher next year and the year after that," Jacob had reasoned. "There's no rush, our family comes first." And they were a family bound by love as much as by law. Jacob had formally adopted William, ensuring that Edward or anyone else could never challenge their right to raise him. The adoption certificate hung framed on the wall alongside their marriage certificate, tangible proof of the bonds they had forged. Edward had made one more attempt to cause trouble, sending a lawyer from Salt Lake City to threaten legal action. But faced with the evidence of his abandonment, plus the legal documents of Jacob and Beatrice's marriage and William's adoption, the lawyer had withdrawn, admitting privately that his client's case was hopeless. Life settled into new rhythms. Jacob expanded the ranch, adding more cattle and horses, while Beatrice transformed the small cabin into a true home. They added a second bedroom for William and made plans for a larger house as their family grew, and grow it did. By the time William celebrated his first birthday, Beatrice was expecting their second child. The news had filled Jacob with such joy that he'd lifted her off her feet, spinning her around the kitchen before setting her down with gentle concern for her condition. "Are you happy?" He'd asked anxiously. "It's not too soon. It's perfect," she'd assured him, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. Another Grayson to love. On a warm evening in May, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, William playing with wooden blocks at their feet. Jacob's arm was around Beatrice's shoulders, his free hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly where their second child grew. "I was thinking," Jacob said, his voice thoughtful. "When the baby comes, perhaps it's time to build that larger house we've been planning. William will need his own room as he grows, and the new little one will need space too." Beatrice leaned into his embrace. "I'd like that, though I've been quite happy in this cabin." "It's been a good home," Jacob agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Our first home together." William toddled over, arms raised to be lifted. Jacob complied, settling the boy on his knee. "What do you think, son? Should we build a bigger house for our growing family?" William grinned, revealing his first teeth. "Da," he declared, patting Jacob's face with chubby hands. Beatrice felt her heart swell with love as she watched them together. William would never know that Jacob wasn't his blood father, or perhaps someday he would, when he was old enough to understand that family was created by love, not merely by birth. What mattered was that Jacob had claimed him from the first, had lifted him at that train station and declared, "I take them both." And he had. He'd taken them both into his heart, his home, his life, creating from the broken pieces of Beatrice's dreams a new reality more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Beatrice Grayson offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the storm that had delayed her train, for the cowboy who had found them in their hour of need, and for the love that had transformed 3 solitary souls into a family. "What are you thinking?" Jacob asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Beatrice smiled, taking his free hand and placing it once more over the child growing within her. "I'm thinking that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best, that being left at that station was the beginning, not the end." Jacob's eyes, warm with understanding, met hers. "The beginning of everything," he agreed, leaning forward to kiss her as their son giggled between them and their second child stirred beneath their joined hands, the family they had created together, from an act of simple kindness on a stormy night in Kelton. 5 years later, the Grayson Ranch had flourished into one of the most prosperous in the territory. The small cabin where their story began still stood, though they'd built a larger house nearby, a comfortable 2-story home with plenty of room for their growing family. William, now 6 and the spitting image of Beatrice with his thoughtful brown eyes and serious expression, had been joined by 3-year-old Joshua, who had Jacob's quiet strength, and 1-year-old Emma, whose sunny disposition brightened even the darkest days. Beatrice had eventually taken the teaching position in Kelton, but only part-time, riding into town 3 days a week while Jacob's mother's sister, Aunt Martha, who had joined their household 2 years prior, watched the younger children. William often accompanied his mother to school, already showing a keen intelligence and love of learning that made Beatrice's heart swell with pride. On this particular evening in late summer, the family gathered on the wide porch of their home, enjoying the cooler air after a hot day. Jacob sat in his favorite rocking chair, Emma dozing against his chest, while Beatrice helped William with his reading. Joshua played at their feet with the carved wooden animals Jacob had made for him. "Pa," William said, looking up from his book, "tell us again about how you found Ma and me at the train station." It was his favorite story, requested often and always told with the same reverence. Jacob smiled, meeting Beatrice's eyes over their children's heads. "Well," he began, his voice taking on the storytelling cadence the children loved. "It was a stormy night, much like the one we had last week. The rain was coming down in sheets, and I'd ridden into Kelton to send a telegram. But the station was closed," William supplied, though he knew the story by heart. Jacob nodded solemnly. "It was. And just as I was about to ride home, I saw something in the shadows, a woman holding a tiny baby with nowhere to go and no one to help her." "That was Mama and me," William said proudly. "That's right. Your mama was the bravest, most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, and you were the tiniest, most perfect baby. And you said, 'I take them both,'" William finished triumphantly. "I did," Jacob confirmed, reaching for Beatrice's hand. "Best decision I ever made. Even better than buying Thunder," Joshua asked seriously, referring to Jacob's prized stallion, The adults laughed, and Jacob ruffled his younger son's hair. Much better, little man. Horses are fine companions, but family is what makes a house a home. Later, after the children were asleep, Jacob and Beatrice sat alone on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast Utah sky. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against him in the comfortable closeness of long married love. "William asks for that story at least once a week," Beatrice observed. "I think he likes hearing how wanted he was, even as a newborn." "He was," Jacob said simply. "From the moment I saw him in your arms, I knew he was meant to be our son." Beatrice turned to look at her husband, still handsome at 35, though silver now threaded his dark hair at the temples. "Did you really know, even then, that we would become a family?" Jacob considered the question, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her shoulder. "Not consciously, perhaps, but something in me recognized you both as mine to protect, to cherish." He smiled, the expression softening his weathered features. "I may not have known we'd have 3 children and a thriving ranch, but I knew I couldn't leave you there. I knew my life would never be the same." "Mine either," Beatrice agreed, leaning up to kiss him softly. "You saved us that night in more ways than one." "We saved each other," Jacob corrected. "I was alone for so long, Beatrice. This ranch was just a place before you and William came. You made it a home." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft nickering of horses in the barn, the gentle creaking of the house as it settled. "I had a letter today," Beatrice said eventually, "from Boston." Jacob's arm tightened slightly around her shoulders. "Edward." "No," she assured him quickly. "From an old friend, Sarah Thompson. She wrote to tell me that Edward died last month, influenza apparently." Jacob was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "How do you feel about that?" He asked finally. Beatrice considered the question. "Sad, I suppose, but distantly. Like hearing of the death of someone I knew long ago, which I suppose is true. The Edward I thought I loved never really existed. He was a creation of my imagination and his deception." "He gave us William," Jacob said generously. "For that, at least, I can be grateful to him." Beatrice smiled at her husband's capacity for forgiveness. "Yes, he did, though William is a Grayson through and through, regardless of blood." "He is," Jacob agreed proudly. "All our children are." "Speaking of which," he hesitated, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "What is it?" Beatrice asked, recognizing the look in his eyes. "I was thinking," he said carefully, "that perhaps our family isn't quite complete yet." Beatrice raised an eyebrow. "Jacob Grayson, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" His smile broadened as he pulled her closer. "Emma's walking now, sleeping through the night, and you've said yourself that teaching 3 days a week leaves you with time on your hands." 4 children, Beatrice mused, pretending to consider the idea, though her heart had already leaped at the suggestion. "The house would certainly be lively." "Livelier," Jacob corrected with a chuckle. "It's already the noisiest, happiest place in the territory." Beatrice turned in his arms, her hands coming up to frame his beloved face. "I would love another child with you, Jacob. Boy or girl, it doesn't matter. Another piece of our love in the world." The kiss they shared held the warmth of 6 years of marriage, the comfort of complete understanding, and the enduring passion that had only deepened with time. "I love you, Beatrice Grayson," Jacob murmured against her lips. "More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." "And I love you," she replied, her heart full to bursting. "For saving us at that station, for making us a family, for loving me through everything." Jacob stood, drawing her to her feet and into his arms. "Let's go to bed, Mrs. Grayson. We have a family to expand." Hand in hand, they walked into the house they'd built together, not just the physical structure of wood and stone, but the home they'd created through love, commitment, and the choice made on a stormy night when a cowboy had lifted a baby and said, "I take them both." And he had. He'd taken them both and given them everything: safety, love, family, home. As Beatrice followed her husband up the stairs to their bedroom, passing the doors behind which their children slept peacefully, she sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the man who had claimed them when they were at their most vulnerable, who had seen their worth when they had nothing to offer but themselves. In the years to come, there would be more children, more joys, more challenges. The ranch would continue to prosper, and their family would become one of the most respected in the territory. William would grow to follow in his father's footsteps, becoming a rancher with Jacob's integrity and Beatrice's intelligence. Joshua would surprise them all by studying medicine and becoming the territory's most sought-after doctor. Emma would marry the son of a neighboring rancher and give Jacob and Beatrice their first grandchildren. And through it all, they would remember how their story began with a woman left at a station with a newborn, and the cowboy who lifted the baby and said, "I take them both." Words that had changed everything, that had turned endings into beginnings, that had created a family from strangers on a stormy night in Kelton.